Good evening, everyone. I will be your host tonight, Mr. Dead Sleep. I'll be taking you through 4 frightening horror stories from some talented authors over at NoSleep on Reddit. As always, likes and subscribes are appreciated, and if you want to comment, awesome. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But right now, just sit back, lay back, whatever's most comfortable for you, and enjoy. Our first story of tonight is titled, We Found Something Strange on the Beach. Are you ready? Let's dive in. A few weeks ago, I was invited to a party by one of my old friends. Since we all had become adults with busy lives, we barely got together anymore. It had been at least 2 years since all of our high school group had been in one spot at the same time. The most well-off of the group, Greg, had a place on the beach. It was a pretty decent-sized place, and I shuddered to think about how much he paid for it. But it was kind of him to offer it up for the weekend. None of us could pass up the chance to relax and party. By the time I got to his place, it was packed. Most people had brought a +1 or a +2. There was a lot of unfamiliar faces, but I quickly was introduced and started to get along with my old friends' new partners. Mostly everyone was drinking and music was playing, but it wasn't like a college party or out-of-control riot. That disappointed one person, Steven. We all liked Steven in our own way, but everyone could only deal with him for so long. I arrived late to Greg's place, and by the time I arrived, Steven was already drunk. He was badgering the other guests in ways only he could. So Greg very kindly asked Steven to go for a walk on the beach and see if he could find any cool shells. I only saw Steven for a few minutes before he was off on his treasure hunt. Catching up with everyone else was a good time. I listened mostly because since college I didn't really have much going on. I hadn't made any effort in dating and just started to work most of the time to pay off my student loans. But my friends enjoyed having someone to talk to about their new adult lives and appreciated me just listening. As time ticked by, Greg got a little bit worried. It was too quiet. He did want a break from Steven, but he had been gone for too long. The sun was going to set, and he worried he may have passed out on the beach or was harassing someone else, because I'd spent the less time with Steven. And I didn't mind him, so I took the bullet and volunteered to go find him. If I couldn't find him while walking the beach, and if no one could reach him on his phone, we would get more serious about looking. The walk along the beach was nice. I was glad to get out for a little while. I did like seeing all my friends, but with being as busy as I was, I never got to just take a walk and enjoy my surroundings. Greg had worked hard to be where he was in his life. I hope he took the time to take walks like this. Just listening to the waves and smelling the salty air. I almost hoped I didn't find Steven, but around a pile of rocks, right near the end of the beach before it turned into a cliff, he was standing looking at something. As I got closer, I thought I would figure out what he was looking at, but I had no idea. I never had seen something like it before. "Oh hey," Steven said, looking over at me when he noticed me walking up. His speech was a little bit slurred, but I think this discovery sobered him up a little. "What even is that?" I asked him, hoping he had any idea. What we were looking at was a cube. It came to about my waist. It was transparent and looked like it was made of a clear gelatin. It did sort of look like a clear block of ice. Aside from mine and Steven's footprints, there was no tracks explained how it got into the beach. Maybe the sea washed it on shore. "I don't know, it doesn't feel cold. Some sort of jello?" Steven asked. Before I could stop him, he reached out a hand and slapped the thing. It made a squishy wet sound and rippled slightly. Not as much as I expected. I honestly didn't think it was the best idea to touch the thing. Who knew what chemicals it was covered in? Or where it even came from? A smart person wouldn't touch it with their bare hands, but Steven was far from smart. He was our dumbest friend, and we, in a way, liked him because of that, even if it got really annoying fast. "I'm gonna put my dick in it." Steven's words caught me off guard. I couldn't speak for a few seconds. This was beyond Steven dumb. That idea was just gross. It made my ears turn red even though I usually don't get embarrassed easily. What? No, why would you... I was sputtering. Why would you do that? You don't even know what it is. He was smiling at me with a drunken gleam in his eyes. It was hard to tell if he was kidding or just wanted to mess with me. When his hands reached for the waistband of his cargo shorts, my hands shot up over my eyes in disgust. Dude, don't be a gross jerk. You don't even know if it's safe to touch it. I heard him cackle over my discomfort and kept his shorts on. It's just some weird jello stuff. It's not some alien goo. Here, look. He shot out his arm and shoved it into the clear cube, the mass parting like slime, letting Steven's arm sink inside. Being the overgrown child he was, he kept squishing his arm in and out, making lewd sounds and laughing. I was not at all impressed. I considered just leaving him and even started to walk away when a scream made me stop. Steven's face was twisted in horror as he was pulling on his arm, looking like he was unable to remove it. My good nature got the better of me. Not considering it was another joke, I ran over and hooked my arms under his to try and pull him back. Yo, dude, it's a joke, Steven answered, laughing at my worry, and shrugged me off. He started to pull his arm out, but stopped, right below the elbow. I wanted to hit him for making me worried like that, but I only scowled. He was a jerk, but he was still our friend. Steven only had a crooked grin on his drunk face for a few seconds. He kept pulling on his arm, but his look started to fall. He pulled and tugged, and even though I was just pranked, I started to get worried. Are you stuck? I asked while watching him struggle, still standing behind him ready to help. No, it's the suction thing. If I wiggle, I can just... I watched as he wiggled and struggled to get his arm free of the cube. When asked for help, I was ready to jump in and start tugging again. But if that didn't work, I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't going to touch the cube, and I didn't have my phone on me. I was using it for directions to get here, and it died. I asked Greg to plug it in for me as soon as I walked in, and didn't grab it on my way out to find Steven. I had to leave him to get help. Hang on, I got it. With one final grunt of effort and one great pull, Steven got his arm free of the cube. Mostly free. I heard a sickening wet ripping sound as his arm came out, but it left parts behind. I had heard the term degloved for a workplace safety video, but because the images were so gruesome, they never showed us photos. Degloved was a word I never hoped I ever had to use or ever had to see. The shock hit him before any pain. Steven stared down at his red arm, layers of skin removed, starting under the elbow, unable to react. My stomach turned. Unable to help it, I turned away from him and lost all of the contents of my stomach. Some went up through my nose and my eyes started to water from the pain. But I kept dry heaving. I was never able to deal with blood. Seeing such a bad injury was beyond something I could handle. I don't know if it was rage or pain, but Steven started to scream shortly after I started to puke. I was facing away from him, so I didn't see what he was doing and I couldn't stop him. I heard slapping sounds between his screaming, like a sound of someone hitting wet sand. The moment I was physically able, I stood up, rubbing my eyes to look at him. I wanted to drag my friend back to the house to get him medical treatment, but my dumb friend had different ideas. Steven was kicking at the clear cube, screeching. The part of his arm that remained was dissolving inside, and in a few seconds, it was gone. His foot was just bouncing off the cube, and he must have thought it was safe because he was wearing sandals and his bare feet weren't touching the thing. I screamed at him to stop with my raw throat, but it was too late. With one final kick, his legs sunk in deep inside the cube. I grabbed him under the arms again, willing myself not to puke, and started to pull, so scared and frantic to think of any better ideas. Somehow he had enough wiggle room to move, so he was face to face with me, foot still stuck. I didn't look at the cube. For him to turn like that, it might have done a number on his ankle. I feared it was already dissolved by the cube. Both of us screaming and yelling for help, he wrapped his arms around me, begging for me to save him. I pulled and used all my strength to try and get him away from that dangerous man-eating object he was stupid enough to even touch. Even if he lost a leg, maybe, if I was fast enough, he could be saved. My skin crawled where his bleeding and injured arm grasped me, but I refused to let it go. I desperately wanted to pull him free and bring him back to Greg's house. I heard that Justin's girlfriend was studying to be a nurse. If I could just get him back, he would be all right. I believed that until Steven stopped screaming. I was sweating and shaking. I looked down at him to see an expression on his face that made me turn cold. He was smiling. "It's all right, it doesn't hurt. Come with me." His arms tightened around my waist. Unable to stop him, I felt myself being dragged closer and closer to the cube. Both his legs at some point had been taken inside. I only saw up to his knees, and the cube started to drag more of him inside, and soon to be myself. All while he grinned like a maniac. I struggled, but I had already used up all the energy trying to save him. I was doomed unless someone came by and saw us. But I doubted anyone cared enough about Steven to come looking. After all, I hadn't actually been gone for very long. It was my turn to beg and plead. I sobbed, begging Steven to let me go. I clawed at his good arm, not being able to bring myself to touch his skinned one, even in that situation. Steven was gone. I knew that. I could no longer save him. His waist was inside the cube, the rest eaten away. I thought that was to be my fate, but something happened. His expression changed. Suddenly he let go, and with his good arm, punched me as hard as he could in the face. My world went black for a few seconds. When I came to, I was on the ground, my friend with a scared yet relieved expression on his face. "Run." It was his last word to me, almost like the cube was angry at him for letting me go. The rest of his body was sucked inside and lost to any rescue. I crab walked away from it as fast as I could, head swimming and vision fading. My face pounded from where he hit me, but I was thankful for it. My eye would be black for some time. He really didn't hold back at all. I stared in horror as the last of Steven was dissolved away. I gave me and the cube some distance. I was still positive it could somehow sense me and get at me, but instead of it coming for me, the cube was now clear from eating away the last of my friend, started to glide away on the sand. It went slowly towards the sea, touching the lapping waves. I didn't know what I was doing, but I felt a crab pull towards it. I stood up on shaking legs and started to follow it. It disappeared inside the sea, and yet I couldn't stop my body from following. I walked and walked, screaming at my body to stop. When I was waist deep in the sea, Steven's face and his last word came to my mind. That snapped me out of whatever trance I was in. In a panic, I forced myself out of the water and started to run towards the house. When I got inside, I was so frantic I tripped over the welcome mat and smashed my face against the shoe rack. It cut open my forehead and I was out again for a few minutes. The party had stopped worrying about me. When I was awake enough, I begged someone to go help Steven. Greg had already called an ambulance for me, but was ready to call for more help. I couldn't tell them the crazy story of strange man-eating jello cubes, so I made up a lie. I said Steven was drunk, tried to go swimming, and went under. I had tried to save him, but I was a bad swimmer. Bad swimmer was an understatement. I've nearly drowned at least 5 times and drowned once. Had to get CPR and spitting up water and everything. They all knew this, and knew why I'd come running for help. To them, if I tried to save him, they would have 2 drowned victims on their hands. And they did try and find him. I needed stitches for my forehead, and because so many people saw me bash my face, none of the police officers thought Steven had hit me. That we got into a fight and I drowned him. They bought the story of him being drunk and going swimming. I don't know if I could have held up under any questioning if they thought of anything else. The reason why they so quickly accepted my explanation is because they already had 6 missing persons suspected to have drowned. When I heard, I had to take a look at those cases. None of the cases reported seeing something strange, just that their loved ones were swimming, then just gone. I hadn't learned anything to prove my strange experience, but then I started to look at different cases in the city next over, and then the next. After hundreds of hours of researching and hundreds of missing persons cases, I could tell 2 things. If that clear cube was real, it was moving up and down the coast. Once it hit one town, at least 16 people went missing near and in the sea, and it would move further down the coast to do the same in a different area. And the second thing I could figure out, there was more than one of these creatures. Both the East Coast and the West Coast had the same pattern. I could tell there was at least 6 of these creatures. I don't know what they are. All I know is if you see something strange on the beach, don't approach it, and be careful swimming. Okay, let's keep these stories moving along. Our next story of the night is titled The Children of the Church. This story takes place about 15 years ago, when I was around 12. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a pastor at a tiny little church in our very small woodsy town. I spent many nights stretched out on a pew while my father worked in his office. I'd pass the time by listening to music on my CD player, doing homework, or reading. It was boring, but my mom worked late nights at the hospital and my dad practically lived at the church, and they were too much overprotective to consider letting me stay home by myself. Still, it never bothered me until this night. After this incident, I pitched quite the fit and didn't give in until my parents finally agreed I could be trusted to stay home when my dad worked nights at the church. I think they could tell I was truly shaken by what had happened, even if I never told them that I was. I had finished my homework and I had forgotten my CD player and a book to read, so I was even more bored than usual. I had already popped into my dad's office to chat with him, but he had sent me out after receiving a late-night call from one of the church members about a personal matter. So I was left wandering between the pews, letting my hands slide along the worn velvet seats, hoping he would wrap it up soon. That's when I heard a child giggling. My initial reaction to the sound was excitement. I assumed the church member and their child were here for some reason and was glad to have some company. But when I turned to the church doors, there was nothing but darkness on the other side of the glass. Only our car was in the parking lot, and the woods beyond looked still and empty. I brushed it off and started to go back to my mindless wandering when I heard it again. This time it sounded like a little girl, and I thought it might be coming from the nursery at the back of the small auditorium. There was a large glass window in the nursery facing the pulpit, so that parents soothing their children could still watch the sermon. The curtains were closed, but I could see 2 very small shadows moving within the room. There were definitely a couple of children playing back there. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" I called out. Immediately the shadows got still. Their heads turned in my direction, and I took a step forward. Both heads ducked down below the window, and I heard the sounds of frantic scrambling to get away. "Hey, it's okay. You're not in trouble or anything," I called out and hurried towards the nursery. By the time I entered the room, however, there was no sign that any children had been there. I was getting more confused by the minute, but I was not yet scared. These kids had obviously gotten into church somehow and were afraid of getting into trouble, so they were hiding. I planned to go back to my dad's office and let him handle it when I heard another giggle. This time it was coming from the stairwell that led down to the basement. I hurried out of the nursery towards the stairs and froze at the top. There was definitely a child standing at the bottom of the stairwell. Judging by the size, the child couldn't have been older than 5 or 6. It was much too dark to see any facial features, but even at this distance, I could smell them. I actually stumbled back and held my nose, gagging. The smell was putrid and strong. This kid had obviously not bathed in a very, very long time. The child giggled again, but there was no humor in the sound. The laugh sounded like it was mocking my discomfort and disgust. It annoyed me more than anything. "Look, you're not supposed to be here," I began, and placed my foot on the first step. The child dropped to all fours and crawled backwards into the darkness of the basement at lightning speed. This is where I began to feel scared. These kids definitely didn't seem normal anymore, but I figured they were probably just messing with me. My little town was not exactly a safe, happy, family sort of town. Meth was a huge problem, and I knew the toll it took on the children of the addicted. I assumed these strange, smelly children were the products of some toothless parents who had passed out on a moldy couch without even thinking to tuck in their own kids. While annoyed and fearful, I had learned from my parents that the less fortunate deserve kindness and understanding, not judgment and fear. These kids were going to need my father's help. "Hey, why don't you come with me and my dad can give you and your sister a ride home? Really, he isn't going to be mad." No answer. But I heard the sound of a door opening and closing. They had obviously gone into one of the classrooms where we would occasionally use for Wednesday night classes. I sighed and descended the stairs, pulling my crappy little flashlight pen out of my pocket as I went. There were 3 classrooms in the basement, and I aimed my weak beam of light towards the one closest to the stairs. The door was closed, so I knew the children had to be in there. "Guys, come on out. We can take you home." "Will you stay with us?" I jumped. The children had spoken perfectly in unison, just like those freaky twins from The Shining. I resisted the urge to dash back up the stairs screaming for my daddy. I mean, we can drive you home," I responded weakly. But I can't stay there with you." "Stay here, with us." A synchronized chuckle came from within the room. "We can play here. Come play." I should have just left. I should have stopped trying to play the hero and just took off, but I didn't. Instead, I stepped closer to the door, and closer, until I was right in front of the door. I could hear the children whispering excitedly inside, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I reached for the doorknob. The children continued to chitter on the other side of the door. I gripped the cool metal. The whispers became frenzied. I turned the doorknob. I heard a triumphant "yes" hissed from mere feet away. I opened the door. Nobody was inside. I shone my flashlight all around the room, under the tables, beneath the cabinets, by the window. Nobody was there. All was silent. I let out a breath of relief and heard an avalanche of giggles above me. I shone my light high to find the 2 children on all fours gripping the tiled ceiling. Their necks twisted so they were grinning down at me, cackling madly. I dropped my flashlight and ran. I burst into my father's office in hysterics, demanding he take me home at once. I never returned to that basement again, and I only returned to the building on Sunday mornings when my parents would literally drag me there. But I stopped doing even that the instant I was able, because on those Sundays when I was forced to go, when I would pass by that stairwell leading to the basement, I sometimes thought I heard a mocking chuckle echo from below. Occasionally, I'd catch a whiff of something putrid, and once, when I dared chance a glimpse down towards the basement below, I saw a tiny, clawed hand emerge from the darkness, beckoning me to come closer. Okay, the next story of the night is titled, "If You Ever Found Yourself Lost." On my 5th birthday, Mother gave me a box of matches. "Listen, Sophia, you have to carry this matchbox with you at all times." She pushed the small cardboard box into my palm and folded my tiny fingers over it delicately. "Promise me?" 5-year-old me was absolutely fascinated by the miniature sticks with tiny red heads contained within the box. I gave a delighted ooh as Mother took out a single match and struck it against the side of the box. Whoosh! The red head ignited and a bright yellow flame began to burn from the top, sizzling and crackling softly. It gradually ate away at the matchstick, turning the wood charcoal black. Mother blew out the flame with a puff of breath. I watched as the white curls of smoke rose up from the charred tip and dissipated in the air. "Remember, if you ever find yourself lost, light a match," she said gently with an enigmatic smile. I must have let my confusion show on my face because she laughed and rubbed my head tenderly. I played with the matches all day, giggling as they made the strange whooshing sound each time they ignited. Sometimes it would take me multiple tries to strike a match, and I would be surprised by the sudden appearance of the flame. I also tested how long I could hold a match in my fingers before the heat became unbearable and I had to let it go. By the time Mother whisked me to bed, the box was near empty, and the floor was littered with small pieces of charred wood. I didn't find out that it wasn't normal to give a child matches until one day our neighbor passed by the front of our house while I was playing with a new box of matches. I was too engrossed in trying to form a snake out of matchsticks, so I didn't notice her approaching Mother, who was hanging up the laundry to dry in the front yard. "Why are you letting her play with matches? Don't you know that's dangerous?" The neighbor's voice caught my attention. I looked at the front yard and saw her standing in front of Mother, her index finger wagging at me. "It's not like she doesn't understand the dangers of fire," Mother argued. "She's only 6. How can you be so irresponsible?" the neighbor rejoined, gesturing wildly at the village. "Do you want her to burn everything to the ground?" She suddenly looked in my direction with a fierce look in her eyes. Frightened, I began to sob and dropped the box of matches in my hand. It bounced and slid open, scattering the matchsticks inside all over the ground. "You?" The neighbor wanted to say something else to Mother, but she huffed upon seeing me and gave Mother a stern look. "I heard about what the fortune teller said about Sophia, but don't you think that this is taking it too far?" With that odd statement, she picked up her rattan basket and left hurriedly down the road. Mother came over to me and squatted such that her worried-stricken face was at eye level. "Don't cry, Sophia. You're stronger than this. Got it?" Mother rubbed my head. I sniffed loudly and blinked away my tears. "Mother, what does Auntie mean by knowing what the fortune teller said about me?" Her hand on my head paused. Sadness flashed in her eyes for just a brief moment before she broke into a gentle smile and resumed rubbing my head. "Don't worry about it, okay? Here, take this. You should go play in the backyard from now on." In my hand was the familiar-looking yellow matchbox. "Just remember, if you ever find yourself lost, light a match." As I grew up and began attending school, I stopped playing with matches and instead went out with friends and schoolmates frequently after school. We would stay outside until nightfall, eating at various roadside stalls, frolicking in the sea, or simply window shopping in the shopping mall downtown, the only place with air conditioning that was accessible to students. Mother insisted that I carry a matchbox in my pocket after I began returning home late, using excuses such as attending remedial classes. I couldn't fathom her weird obsession with matches, but the box was small and lightweight enough to not really bother me much. It was also sometimes useful to have it around, such as the times when we had to light the candles on cakes during birthday parties or ignite the fuses of fireworks brought in from the street market. I didn't discover the reason behind Mother's actions until much later. It happened on a rainy night. We were a group of rebellious teenagers savoring the first taste of our newfound freedoms. I hung out with a classmate named Nathan a lot, and although I didn't show it, I was starting to consider dating him for real. It was right after our midterms, and Nathan suggested that we go to the coast to have fun. His parents had just bought him a lake, a brand new Honda EX5, and he was eager to show it off to us. We were joined by 2 good friends of ours, Jordan, who used his parents' Yamaha scooter, and Aisha, Jordan's girlfriend. The beach that Nathan chose was further up north than where we usually went, near a small town called Batu Ferenghi. To reach there, we had to travel through a winding 2-lane coastal road that none of us were familiar with. We made a quick stop at a sundry shop where Nathan bought a 6-pack of cheap booze and asked for directions from the owner. The middle-aged uncle told us to just follow the road we were on until we reached our destination. "It goes uphill?" Nathan asked. noticing that the road curved steeply upwards ahead and disappeared into the dense forest. Up ahead, the road runs along the top of the cliff for about 3 kilometers. You should slow down once you see the cliff. There's a lot of hidden turns, and if you're not careful, you can drive straight into the ocean. For some reason, the uncle's ominous warning unsettled me, while the other 3 simply laughed and joked about racing each other to see who ends up alive. We loaded the beer onto Nathan's scooter and set off. It was just as the uncle described. Once we rounded the corner, the magnificent view of the sea greeted us. The road twisted and turned as it snaked along the cliff's edge. Large waves crashed below, spraying white spumes over the jagged rocks. "Hey, look!" Jordan pointed at a bright red sign up ahead. The bold white letters read, Awas Kawasan Kamalangan, roughly translated from Malay to Caution, Accident Area. Aisha hit him with her fist playfully, telling him to keep his eyes on the road. "Don't worry, I won't drive us off the cliff," Nathan said over the howling wind, sensing the tension in my hands which held onto his sides. "No, I'm not worried about that." I gave him a reassuring smile, but he couldn't see it because I was sitting directly behind him. The road eventually straightened and turned away from the coastline. We went downhill and arrived at the town. From the main road, we could see the sprawling sandy beach and the faint outline of the sea. "Is this your first time here?" Nathan grinned as I gawked at the sheer size of the beach in amazement. "Well, I don't live along the coast like you do," I rebuked him jokingly. The rest of the day whizzed past in a swift blur. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we cracked open the cans of beer and laughed about how awful the midterms were for everyone. "I think those are rain clouds, aren't they?" Nathan suddenly pointed to the sky, drawing all of our attention to the brewing clouds in the distance. "Looks like we better go before the storm hits," Jordan murmured. By the time we packed up and left the beach, it was beginning to drizzle. The night market where we parked our bikes was in a frenzy as the stall owners hastily set up parasols to protect their wares from the incoming rain. Nathan stopped by a stall and bought an umbrella before passing it to me. "I can't use this while on the bike, can I?" I asked. "You're going to need it to return home, idiot." Nathan kicked the kickstand up and pushed his scooter to my side. "Here, wear my extra jacket." After wrapping the oversized black leather jacket around my body, I climbed into his scooter. We joined Jordan and Aisha, who were waiting at the edge of the main road. The journey back was uneventful, until we began to climb uphill as we reached the stretch of the road that lined the coast. "Whoa, look at that." Nathan pulled over and signaled for Jordan, who was following behind to stop. I peeked out from behind Nathan's back and saw the thick fog rolling in ahead. The headlight on his scooter could barely illuminate the road past the fog. "What's this?" Jordan asked, a frown appearing on his usual carefree face as he surveyed the fog. "Maybe it came from the forest," Aisha suggested. It didn't really sound plausible, but we couldn't come up with any better explanation for the sudden fog. "Should we turn back?" I asked in a low voice. Nathan's voice was suddenly interrupted by a clap of thunder. It reverberated across the empty, unlit road, sounding more like a growl from a ferocious predator than actual thunder. "There's no other way back to where we came from," Jordan said. "If we turn back now, we're probably stuck here until the storm passes at least." It was already close to 8 p.m., and the storm didn't seem like the kind that would pass soon, judging by the howling wind and flashes of lightning illuminating the cloudy night sky. "If I don't reach home by 10, I'll be grounded," Aisha said bitterly. Nathan and Jordan exchanged helpless looks and stared at the fog silently. There were no street lights along the entire stretch of road until we reached the sundry shop at the other end, and the pitch-black darkness coupled with the dense fog was foreboding to say the least. Rain began to pelt down, stinging our faces. I wrapped the jacket around me tighter as a cold gust of wind swept through the road. "Hey, how about we follow that car?" Nathan suddenly spoke, pointing behind us. Sure enough, we could see the glow of car headlights approaching us. Yeah, we should. Jordan started the engine and rolled his bike to the edge of the road. Nathan followed suit, and we waited for the white Proton Saga to drive past us before following behind. I shivered despite the warmth of the jacket once we entered the fog. The air became frigid cold, and I could see my breath clouding out around my face. Nathan must have felt the sudden drop in temperature too, because his body tensed up. We followed the glowing red taillights in front of us as close as possible without tailgating the car. The beam of light from Nathan's scooter reflected off a sign off to the side of the road, blinding both of us momentarily. I blinked and squinted to read the sign. Awas, Kawasan, Kamalangan. Somehow the warning sign seemed much more sinister in the fog. Hang on tight, Nathan said, trying to laugh as we went around a bend in the road. You don't... What? What's wrong? I looked ahead of us, but it was just more of the same white fog ahead. The car... My blood ran cold when I realized it too. We could no longer see the taillights in the fog. Shit, what do we do now? Jordan pulled up next to us and, realizing why we slowed down, cursed out loud. There was no other choice but to continue forward. Nathan gestured for Jordan to stick by us as we traveled further into the fog, trying our best to spot any sudden turns ahead. We must have crawled along the road for about 10 minutes before Aisha broke the tense silence. Hey guys. Her voice sounded so fragile it was as if she was going to break down any second. Was this road that long when we traveled on it earlier? Jordan attempted to calm her down, but deep down we were all wondering the same thing. The lack of streetlights might have messed with our perception of distance, but we had only passed one bend in the last 10 minutes when there were turns almost every 50 meters from what I remembered. A flash of red light caught our attention. The headlights of our bikes slowly revealed the sign off to the side of the road. Awas, Kawasan, Kamalangan. Didn't we... My voice trailed off because all of us exchanged frightened looks with one another at the same time. The sign passed us, and up ahead was a bend, the same bend where Nathan and I lost the car. Without a word, Nathan pulled over and motioned for Jordan to follow suit. We might be lost. How can we be lost on a road that goes in one direction? Aisha said, but her voice was trembling uncontrollably. Silence fell upon us as we stared at the threatening fog ahead. I realized with the chill that it was way too quiet. We were supposed to be next to the ocean, but other than the susurration of leaves and sound of raindrops, I couldn't pick up any other noises in our surroundings. A chilly gust of wind howled across the road. I dug my hands into my pockets to try and warm them with my body heat. My fingers brushed against a familiar object. The matchbox. Because of the jacket, it was still dry despite the rain. I suddenly recalled Mother's words from when I was still a child. Nathan, can you help hold the umbrella over me? The umbrella? He shot me a confused look, but did as I said. I motioned for the other two to gather around me. I pulled out a match and dragged it along the side of the box with trembling fingers. Whoosh! The head ignited with a spark. A small, wavering flame burned. Holy! Jordan shrieked, stumbling into us as he hastily retreated into the umbrella. A collective shiver ran through us as I held the burning match as far out as possible. The glow of the flame revealed the outlines of hands moving in the fog. There must have been hundreds of thousands of them, disappearing and reappearing in new spots like wisps of smoke. Aisha let out a whimper as she clutched onto Jordan, who was shaking like a leaf. Hold this. I handed a frozen Nathan the lit match and struck another one. This time I threw it in front of us into the fog. The hands retreated as soon as the flame touched them. The fog began to shift and quiver as if it was alive. The road. Nathan mumbled as we watched the fog dissipate into nothingness. The match in his hand burned out and shriveled. To our collective horror, the fog began to materialize and creep back onto the road. The hands were seemingly all headed towards us, grasping for whatever they could hold. I struck one more match and threw it towards the approaching fog. Get on the bikes! The other three didn't need me to say anything further. In a heartbeat, we were on our scooters speeding down the slippery road as fast as we dared. The road mercifully straightened after a series of hair-raising turns, and we began to go downhill, leaving the cliff behind us. None of us spoke about this incident ever since we parted ways that night. When I returned home, Mother was watching the late-night news on the TV. It was then that I learned that while we were at the beach, there had been a tragic, fatal accident at the ferry terminal. 32 people were killed when the bridge collapsed. I don't know whether the hands in the fog were related to those who passed away that day, but the fact that it happened mere kilometers from where we were made it seem too much of a coincidence. I never found out what the fortune teller told Mother when I was 5, but to this day, I still keep a box of matches in my purse, just in case I ever find myself lost again. And our final story of the night is titled Blades of Grass. Here we go. Every day I see them through my bedroom window. My next door neighbors, the 4 of them, mother, father, son, and daughter, hunched over, crawling up and down their lawn, grass flowing in the warm summer wind, their mouths open, their teeth biting it, detaching the tops of the blades, chewing, swallowing. I have to shut my blinds. I can't stand it. What are they? Humans or goats? But even the blinds drawn, I could hear the sounds. The cud-crushing sounds. Where in the wider world are they from? God damn it, this is America, and that's not how we do it here. We use machines, gas, mowers. We don't get on hands and knees and meet the grass halfway, praying gobbledygook as we meet the blades on their own terms. Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty. Freaks. Later. A knock at the door. What time is it? I crawl out of bed, where I'd been sitting comfortably with my book, grab my handgun because one can never be too careful these days, and peer out the kitchen window. There they stand. What the hell do they want? What do you want? I asked, opening the door, holding the handgun behind my back. We would enjoy to eat your lawn, the father says. They smile. Christ, their grinnish teeth. I got a mower, I say. I mow my lawn. We would enjoy to eat the remnants, the father says. Or mulch, says the son. Christ almighty. If you have to eat the grass, eat your own grass, I say. It is no longer enough, the father says. I'm sprouting, says the mother. I fix my grip on the handgun behind my back. My fingers are slickening. Why can't they just go? The mother's skin cracks. Falls. Her body is soil, pregnant with worms and plants and other bugs, all moving, an ocean of dirt and organics. I pull the gun from behind my back and point it at her. Please, the father says. Grass. Why is he so fucking calm? Get off my porch. Blades of grass begin to emerge from the mother's dirt body. The flakes of her discarded skin blow away in the sudden breeze. I swear to God. The blades explode from within her and wrapping her body in green. Inhuman. I fire 2 shots, one in the air and the other at the mother, through whom the bullet passes before smacking into the house across the street, before turning and gunning it through my own house, down the stairs, into the backyard. They follow. They're all sprouting now, losing their skin flakes on my hardwood floor. 4 green mummies. I stop at the far end of my backyard. Their silhouettes mock me from my own deck. You have beautiful grass, the father says. His voice has earthened. The mother steps onto the grass and disappears. No splash, but otherwise likened to the deep end of a swimming pool. I need to climb the fence. I'm frozen in place by fear. The mother reappears mid-yard, resurfacing as part of the lawn like a trampoline descending. The 3 others dive in too. I point my gun at the Distenuous gliding across my backyard and fire until there are no bullets left. Click, click. I have to make a run. I do it, from fence to deck to open door, eyes closed, heart racing, back on the hardwood. Eyes open, heart still racing. Outside, they prowl the yard like floral sharks. I collapse into an armchair. I want the police to come, but they do not. Somebody must have heard the shots. Nobody comes. The street is quiet. A warm breeze enters through the open front door. The hinges squeak. I hear the father's voice. You have beautiful grass. I got a mower. I mow my own lawn, I say weakly. Feed us, fertilize us, says the lawn itself, its voice rising from beneath the foundations of the house, making the walls rattle. With what? I ask. I'm having a conversation with the ground. I slap my face. I bang my head against the wall. We were human-likes feasting on the grass. Now we shall be grass-likes feasting on humanity. One more bang. I woke up hungover on the hardwood floor. The front and back doors were open. There was a hole in the living room wall. My head ached. My bedroom blinds were drawn, and when I opened them, I no longer saw the neighbors. Weeks have passed, and there's no trace. Their house stands empty. Their grass grows. Yet it does not grow as quickly or thick as mine. My mower sits in the garage unused. I lack the will to use it. In the evenings, when the sun goes down, a warm wind rushes in, and on its blowing I cannot help but catch the words. Feed us. Fertilize us. It cannot be. They have just moved out, abandoned their home and left. Feed us. Fertilize us. Every day a little angrier, with a little more bloodlust. They were once human-likes feasting on the grass. Now I pray for the salvation of us all. And that was our final story of tonight, everyone. I hope you enjoyed listening. I'll be back soon with a group of new scary stories, but in the meantime, if you'd like this video and subscribe, it would mean a lot to me as I'm trying to grow this channel. Once again, I am Mr. Dead Sleep, and good night.